They say betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers. Mine came dressed in a Hugo Boss suit, holding a glass of Cabernet, toasting to us. My name is Vivian Hale. I used to sign deals worth millions with the same hand I used to zip up his suit jackets before every board meeting. They called us a power couple. Graham and Vivian. He built the vision. I built the numbers. It was all so neat, so clean, so believable. Until I woke up one morning with the Department of Justice knocking on my front door. It started 3 months before that. Subtle things, little things, like the way Graham began locking his study door, even when I was the only one home, or how our CFO meetings were suddenly rescheduled to times I wasn't notified about. I remember standing in that empty glass conference room, watching his reflection in the opposite building's window as he laughed with our attorneys, thinking, when did my own company start happening without me? But you don't jump to conclusions when you love someone. You rationalize. Graham was busy. The company was growing fast. He was under pressure. We were under pressure. Besides, we had just been featured on the cover of Visionary Tech magazine, he as the founder, me as the financial genius. The cover title still makes my stomach turn. Built by brilliance. Powered by trust. The irony could kill. One night, I got up to grab water and noticed Graham's laptop glowing from the den. He never left it open. And yet, there it was, an open spreadsheet, contracts, wire transfers, my name, my signature, scattered like confetti across documents I had never seen before. At first, I thought maybe it was a draft, a mistake, but as I scrolled through the files, that eerie feeling settled in my bones. Everything was dated, time-stamped, every transaction routed through accounts I didn't recognize. Yet every form bore one thing in common: my authorization, my signature, my identity. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed more. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. So I did what any woman trained in finance, law, and self-preservation would do. I made copies. Quietly. Cleanly. And then I waited. 3 weeks later, the hammer dropped. I was arrested at 7:13 a.m. on a Wednesday, wearing silk pajamas, barefoot, with a toothbrush still in my mouth. They read the charges like they were reading out grocery items: securities fraud, embezzlement, falsifying financial records, wire fraud, 27 counts in total, 27. One for each of the months I spent building the company alongside Graham. He watched from the stairs, bathrobe, hair wet, coffee in hand. His face was a perfect mask of shock. Not too dramatic, just enough confusion to look innocent. He didn't say a word, just stared at me while the agents handcuffed me in front of our custom staircase, the one I designed. That day was the longest I'd ever known. The inside of a holding cell smells like sweat and fear. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat, silent, calculating. My bail was posted quickly anonymous, but I knew it was him. He wanted me out, not out of kindness. No. He needed me out so he could play the narrative, spin the story, and spin he did. By evening, a press release hit every major media outlet. Vivian Hale has been temporarily removed from her position amid a federal investigation. Graham Hale and the Hale Tech Board remain fully committed to transparency and cooperation. They didn't even say alleged, just hung me on a hook and offered me up to the public. I watched him on television that night, standing in front of Hale Tech headquarters, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, delivering a heartfelt statement about his wife's illness, how she acted alone, and how they would heal together. I sat there, watching him lie through perfect teeth, and something in me, a split. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is hot, loud. What I felt was quieter, heavier, like sinking into ice water. I wasn't drowning. I was adjusting. The days that followed blurred together: court hearings, asset freezes, interviews with legal counsel. My accounts were locked, my name removed from board filings. Our joint properties quietly reassigned through emergency shareholder votes. Graham was erasing me in real time, but what he didn't erase was my memory, or my access to our founding documents. I had built the financial skeleton of Hale Tech. I knew where the bones were buried. So while they cut me out of press releases and plastered my face across every financial scandal headline, I did what no one expected. I stayed quiet. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't lash out. I didn't protest my innocence. Because I knew the storm was still building, and I had no interest in surviving it. I planned to become it. They call it a preliminary hearing, as if there's anything preliminary about watching your life unravel under fluorescent lights. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, not the grand cathedral of justice I had pictured, but a box, beige walls, cheap chairs, a silence so heavy it pressed into my collarbone like a second set of handcuffs. Graham sat across the room, 2 seats behind his legal team. He didn't look at me, not once. His lawyer, Elliot Crane, wore a navy suit that cost more than most people's rent. He had the confidence of a man who knew the outcome before the game began. That smug, entitled calm. I used to think I could read Graham's face, but that day his expression was unreadable. Not because it was blank, no, because it was curated, controlled, as if he'd rehearsed the role of betrayed husband in front of a mirror. Maybe he had. They read the charges again, slower this time, as if enunciating would make them true. The judge's voice echoed, dry and deliberate. The defendant is accused of falsifying quarterly reports, diverting investor funds into shell accounts, and knowingly submitting fraudulent audits over a 3-year period. My name, Vivian Hale, landed with the same weight as a verdict. I didn't flinch. That's the thing about betrayal. Once you've tasted it, nothing else shocks you. You just adjust your expectations. Graham's lawyer submitted a motion for expedited proceedings. He said Hale Tech was suffering from Ms. Hale's continued presence in the public eye. He used words like toxic, unstable, emotional. I wanted to laugh. Emotional, I had been an iceberg for weeks. My attorney, Leonard Briggs, a quiet, brilliant man with paper-thin glasses and a spine of steel, leaned over and whispered, "Let them talk." So I did. Let them paint me as the hysterical wife. Let them whisper words like breakdown and betrayal. Let them forget that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. The hearing ended with bail conditions and court dates. My assets remained frozen, my accounts under review. I was granted limited travel, supervised access to my own home, and strict restrictions on speaking to anyone affiliated with Haletech, including Graham. The irony. That house, the one he now ruled like a king, I had financed its renovation. I had chosen every tile, every marble slab, every chandelier. And now, I needed permission to breathe under its roof. I went back only once, not for closure, for evidence. I waited until he was out of town an investor summit in Aspen and used my one legal window to retrieve personal belongings. In reality, I retrieved data. Tucked beneath the guest room floorboard was a fireproof box. Inside USB drives, notebooks, 2 backup phones. A keycard Graham didn't know I still had my access to the secondary server, the one we used when the company was in its infancy, before the cloud swallowed everything. I left without touching anything else. Let him think I was too broken to fight. Let him believe the narrative he'd so carefully constructed. It was better that way. You don't warn the house you're about to burn it down. The public narrative escalated fast. Articles started popping up, the fall of Vivian Hale. From powerhouse to prisoner pundits dissected my posture, my outfits, my silence. The louder they got, the quieter I became. I turned down every interview, deleted social media, blocked friends who asked too many questions. Even my mother couldn't reach me. But behind the curtain, I was building. I found her on the 3rd week, Emma Voss, a former corporate attorney who once represented a startup Graham had crushed in court. She lost. But not because she lacked skill, because she lacked proof. Now, she wanted blood. I had the map. We met in a diner 2 towns over. She slid into the booth like she already knew she'd say yes. "I've been waiting for someone to bury him," she said, sipping cheap coffee with the elegance of a queen. I laid out everything, quietly, calmly. No tears, no dramatics, just facts, names, timestamps, documents, metadata. Her face changed by the 5th folder. "You're not innocent," she finally said. "You're brilliant. That's more dangerous." I smiled for the first time in months. That night, we drew a blueprint, not just to clear my name. That would be too easy, too small. I wanted something bigger, deeper, final. I wanted to dismantle him. We planned a reverse case, a civil countersuit for defamation, damages, and fraudulent transfer of corporate control. But that was just the cover. The real strike would come from what I'd been assembling in silence, a forensic trail of every falsified document, every forged signature, every modified log, and all of it led back to Graham, but not yet. The plan was patience. I showed up to every court date looking precisely how they wanted me to look: tired, quiet, beaten down. I let their side win procedural battles, let them laugh, let them leak lies to the press. Every headline that dragged me made them bolder, sloppier. And in the meantime, Emma contacted 3 whistleblowers I knew from the early days of Hailtech, 2 quietly forced out by Graham. 1 bought off. She got them on record, signed, sealed. By the time the trial began, they thought they had already won, and maybe, in their version of the story, they had. But I wasn't living in their story anymore. I was writing my own. They thought I was waiting for mercy. But mercy was never the goal. The truth is, I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was reconstructing the crime scene with better lighting. By the time the trial date was set, Emma and I had turned the diner into a war room: sticky notes, laptop screens, legal pads filled with details so damning they could silence a Senate hearing. Every night I went home with the same thought humming behind my ribs: I'm not here to survive him. I'm here to end him. Graham had no idea. He thought I was still reeling, thought the silence meant defeat. That's the problem with men like him. They confuse stillness with weakness. They see composure and call it surrender. But I wasn't staying still. I was sharpening. Let's be clear about something: Graham was smart, ruthless, charismatic, the kind of man who knew how to weaponize charm. He didn't just destroy people, he made them thank him for the favor. But I helped build him. I knew the cracks in his mask, the passwords he reused, the lie he once told an investor about his father's fake war medals to manipulate funding. He may have framed me, but he forgot one thing: I kept the blueprint. It started with the printer logs. One of the earliest contracts he claimed I signed, transferring our international assets to an offshore holding account, was dated March 17th. But the office printer logs showed something interesting. No print jobs were executed on that model until March 18th at 2:11 a.m. by his assistant's keycard. The document was printed again 5 minutes later, under his, and still bore my signature, but I wasn't in the country on March 17th. I was on a red-eye flight back from Tokyo after a client pitch that he begged me to take in his place. I even had a selfie with the pilot. Emma called it the alibi of poetic irony. Next came the metadata. Digital forensics are brutal if you know where to look. On his hard drive, buried under renamed folders and deleted caches, we found drafts of the audit reports, not one version, 5, all edited in a 36-hour window, with revisions that slowly scrubbed out the original figures and replaced them with inflated revenue projections. The final version, sent from my email address, it had all the hallmarks of my formatting: my font, my spacing, but the timestamps didn't lie. He had created the file on his own device and ported it through a cloned local server to send it under my credentials. A perfect trick unless someone was watching the version history. And I was... Emma brought in a cybersecurity analyst named Harper. She was 26, wore combat boots to depositions, and had no respect for people who used lies as passwords. Her face lit up like a wildfire when we decrypted the audit history. "He's not just sloppy," she said. "He's arrogant. And that's better. That's useful." Every lie Graham had told was now reverse engineered. Every mistake had its origin timestamp. Every manipulation was backed by a digital trail, preserved in 3 off-site storage units and a secure cloud under 2-step authentication. One password, my mother's name. The other, the name of the rescue dog Graham refused to let me adopt. Poetic justice. Encoded. By week 5, Emma said what I hadn't dared to: "We have enough to bury him in court. Or we could go bigger." I looked up. "How much bigger?" She smiled. "We make him confess without knowing he's confessed. We make the courtroom collapse on him, brick by brick, while he's still smiling." So we crafted the endgame. I would stay silent during most of the trial. Appear defeated, meek, trapped in doubt. Let him take the spotlight. Let him call witnesses paid. Let him present documents fabricated. Let him claim I was mentally unstable, a woman in over her head, a liability to her own success. Let him believe the script he wrote, and then we flip it. At closing arguments, I would not testify. I would submit evidence, one sealed drive. Not a monologue, not a sob story, just timestamps, surveillance, printer logs, server paths, 3 audio clips, 2 witnesses, and 1 video. I'll get to that. While the world thought I was drowning, I was collecting whispers. I found 2 employees Graham had fired in the early years, one for violating security protocol, the other for attitude problems. In reality, they had raised red flags on discrepancies in the audit pipeline. They still had copies. I brought them in under subpoena. One broke down during deposition. I didn't know what he'd do to me, she whispered, shaking. But I always knew what he did to you. I placed her on the list. Then came the final piece of camera. Back in our house, my house was a security camera Graham never knew I installed. It faced the study door. I'd added it after one of our junior analysts left the company suddenly, and I started trusting my instincts more than Graham's reassurances. He never knew. In that video, dated just 2 weeks before my arrest, he's seen entering the study at 3:43 a.m., carrying 3 folders, sitting down, forging my signature while whispering to himself. Just one more, then it's clean. Emma watched it on loop. He narrates his own destruction. She said, like Shakespeare, but dumber. We prepared the drive with every piece of proof compiled, verified, time-locked. We had the original signatures, the doctored versions, the discrepancies in font size, document creation times, geolocation mismatches, everything. I slept like a stone the night before trial, not because I knew I'd win, but because I knew he'd lose. In his own words, in his own arrogance, courtrooms have a smell, not of justice, of old paper, cheap perfume, sweat tucked under suit collars. The air was heavy this day I walked in, but not for me. For him. Graham arrived first, navy suit, white shirt, a tie I bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. The one he insisted was his lucky one, a bold choice, bold or blind. He looked confident, too confident, shaking hands with reporters outside, kissing the camera with that carefully rehearsed sadness he always wore when the world watched. Behind that charm, though, was a man about to stand on the very trap he designed. I wore black, no statement necklace, no rebrand haircut, just structure, precision, absence of color, because nothing about this day deserved softness. Emma met me at the courthouse steps. She didn't say a word, just handed me the sealed evidence drive. The final nail in a coffin Graham had built thinking it was mine. Inside, the court buzzed like a hive, press rows full, analysts muttering, everyone ready to watch the spectacle of the brilliant wife undone. Let them... I wasn't there to convince them I was innocent. I was there to let the facts speak in the language liars can't translate proof. The prosecution started strong. They always do. Graham's lawyers outlined my supposed fraud with the precision of surgeons, spreadsheets, audit trails, witnesses who swore I signed documents I'd never seen. One testified that I grew erratic in the last 6 months. Another said I rushed quarterly meetings and avoided transparency. I let them talk. I didn't object. I didn't flinch. I let the image of Vivian Hale, the unraveling, bloom in their minds. Because people remember the fall more than the flight. Graham kept glancing toward me. Not directly, just the way a man does when he wants to confirm the enemy is still bleeding. He smiled once. I didn't. Day 3. My turn. Emma approached the bench with calm so focused it cut the room in half. She handed the judge a sealed envelope containing a USB drive labeled only with a case number. No theatrics, just a drive. Your Honor, she said, her voice cold and exact. We submit this into evidence under Rule 403B. No narrative, no cross-examination. Let the record speak. The judge nodded. The screen lit up. It started with timestamps, document logs, file versions, server metadata. The audit trail of audit trails reconstructed by our digital forensics team and authenticated under federal chain of custody law. Silence swallowed the room. Then came the video. Graham, 3:43 a.m., his study, a bourbon glass sweating onto a contract, his voice, soft but caught perfectly on the security cam mic. Just one more. Then it's clean, just like she used to do it. The courtroom didn't gasp. It held its breath. The video continued. He forged my signature 3 times, then paused, leaned back, smiled at the document like it was art. He signed his own name on the witness line. That was the tell. That's how we got him. Because the original filing submitted to court had that witness line blank. He didn't just frame me, he framed himself framing me. When the video ended, Emma calmly cued the next file, a recording of a call between Graham and his assistant. His voice again. No, she won't fight back. She thinks silence equals grace. She's too proud to beg. That's what makes her useful. Useful. Not wife, not partner. Useful. The judge asked if I wanted to testify. I stood, looked across the room at Graham, and said, "No, Your Honor. I believe my silence has already said enough." Graham's lawyer scrambled, objected, claimed fabrication, demanded a full review of chain of custody, of context, of intention. But the evidence didn't need interpretation. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't subjective. It was digital. And digital remembers. The judge recessed early. Everyone needed oxygen. Graham didn't look so confident anymore. His hands shook slightly when he reached for his water. His tie, his lucky tie, was skewed just enough to betray his unraveling. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. Because this wasn't revenge. This was recognition. The press went feral. Tech tycoon caught in forgery scandal. Wife's silent drive implodes Hale legacy. She said nothing and won everything. But the truth is, I didn't feel like I'd won. Not yet. Winning would be too clean. This wasn't a victory. It was an autopsy. And the corpse on the table was the marriage, the company, the reputation we built together rotted from the inside by his greed, his need for power, his belief that I was disposable. Court adjourned for deliberation. Emma and I walked out together, past the cameras, past the whispers, past the place where my name had been smeared. Graham didn't follow. He had nowhere left to go. They say justice is blind. But I watched her open her eyes. The verdict came 3 days later. 3 days of headlines, whispers, speculation. 3 days of waiting not for the outcome, but for the silence to settle. Because silence, once weaponized, becomes sharper than any scream. The courtroom was quiet as the judge read the words. On the charges brought against Vivian Hale, this court finds the defendant not guilty, not relief, just stillness. Then came the rest. An official investigation into Graham Hale for perjury, corporate fraud, falsifying federal documents, and witness tampering, a federal inquiry launched, accounts frozen, assets traced. Graham didn't look at me when they cuffed him. But I looked at him, not with rage, not with pity, with clarity. There was no victory in his downfall, only truth, and truth. When revealed without performance, burns cleaner than any revenge. The courtroom emptied around me like water down a drain. Emma gripped my hand once, brief and firm, no words, just respect. I stepped outside into a sea of flashing bulbs and microphones, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because this wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the beginning of a correction. The truth wasn't just out, it was anchored. Over the next month, the headlines pivoted from wife or fraud to architect of the empire, from Graham Hale's betrayal to how Vivian Hale reclaimed her legacy. Without saying a word, they called me the silent widow of Hale Tech. Cute. What they didn't know was this: I never left Hale Tech. Not really. 6 months before my arrest, when I first noticed Graham shifting decisions behind my back, I began a quiet audit not of the finances, but of the power structure. Through a shell company, VHC Holdings, I acquired stock, quietly, through proxy shareholders, through tiny trusts, through names no one connected to me. By the time I was arrested, I owned 28%. By the time the verdict was announced, 47%. I didn't want revenge, I wanted control. Not of Graham, of myself. The company we built together, he had tried to bury me under it, so I decided to rise through it. The day after his arrest, the board convened an emergency session. The chair, Graham's closest ally, offered a smooth public statement, suggesting stability during difficult times. I arrived 15 minutes late, wearing the same black suit I wore to court, hair down, no smile. I sat at the head of the table, not a guest, not a victim, a majority stakeholder. They all turned to me when I spoke. "You built your company on my silence," I said. Now it will operate under my terms. And they didn't argue, because numbers don't lie, and I had become the math they couldn't manipulate. 3 months later, I walked through the doors of my flagship building. The portrait of Graham that once hung in the lobby had been taken down. In its place, a new inscription. Integrity doesn't need applause, just proof. Some people called me cold. Others called me brilliant. Neither mattered. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to lead. Behind the scenes, I launched an internal restructuring, reviewed every deal Graham had touched, quietly reached out to employees who had been forced out, brought them back at double salary. I paid no public tribute, no interview, no book deal. Instead, I built a mentorship program the Hale Foundation named not after him, but after the idea that power must be earned, not inherited. They wanted a phoenix story, but I wasn't reborn. I was remembered. As for Graham, he took a plea deal, avoided a federal trial by admitting guilt on 2 lesser charges, lost his shares, lost his name. The last I heard, he was living in upstate New York, alone, his legal team slowly abandoning him as the money dried up. He sent me a letter once, no apology, just 10 words. You never even raised your voice. I didn't reply, because justice isn't loud, and neither am I. People ask me how I did it, how I survived the lies, the betrayal, the public shame, the courtroom. I tell them this: I didn't survive. I designed it, brick by brick, silence by silence. And when it was done, I didn't raise my voice. I raised the floor they tried to bury me under. Now I walk on it.